to be throwing a plate, and because a plate is flatware, we need to throw it on a bat, because otherwise we can't take it off the wheel without it getting all bendy and out of shape. So we have these great things called bat mates, which are round pieces of chamois, and these help to hold the bat on the wheel. Look, it takes a little bit of fiddling to get the to work out the dampness of everything to get it stuck on. But I just lightly wet the wheel. I've got a damp bat mate. Hopefully there's enough water on that. I take my bat. I'm going to just wet down the back of that bat, and I'm going to place it on the wheel. So this bat luckily is the same size as the wheel, so that makes it really easy to centre on the wheel. If the bat's a little bit bigger, you know, you really want to try and centre it using your fingers on the side of the wheel to make sure it's kind of centred, because otherwise it can put you off a little bit optically, and it's better to have it as centred as possible. Okay, so we've got our bat on there. It's nice and dry. So I have kneaded some clay into the cone shape. It's got the spiral on the base. It's going into the middle of the bat. So I'm throwing a large plate. So this is like a large dinner plate, and I would normally use about 1.8 kilos of clay for a large dinner plate. So to get this firstly stuck onto the bat, I'm going to apply some pressure, some downward pressure onto that clay. So I've got this hand pushing down, and this hand's still on the side. I'm still anchored, but I'm just really wanting to get that clay anchored onto the bottom of that bat. And I suppose also getting that bat anchored onto the bat mate. So a little bit more water, getting that nice and pressed on there. All right, so I'm going to start off with some coning. So anchored, this part of the hand, pushing forward. Now you have to be quite firm. You need a little bit of muscle into this. You are using more clay. So I'm coning it up. I've got a little hole in the top here. I don't want that to cover over because I'll get an air bubble in that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open that up. So I've got my finger, I'm opening that up, and then I'm just going to push that in with my left hand into the side, and a little bit more water, and get that pressed into the cone shape. All right, so then I can start to cone that up again, and that way now we've got this little bit up the top. Always just keeping an eye on what the clay's doing. So down here, there's a bit of action happening down here, so we're going to have to be careful of that. So I've got it into a nice cone. Applying that pressure. So with this larger bit of clay, I've got the left hand, this part, it's on here, and this part's on the top, and that's still pressing that dome shape. You've got to keep adding water, because as soon as it starts getting dry, it starts sticking to your hands. Look, you know, different people throw things differently, and I've had about 8 teachers in my life, and you know, you end up picking up little things from everybody and you work out what works for you. So some people like to throw drier than others. I usually throw with quite a lot of water. But there are many different ways to do everything. So I'm just getting that into the dome shape again. And it's nice and centred. Okay, so from here, I'm going to start to flatten this out. So basically, I'm going to keep pressing this dome down until it sort of flattens out a bit. I want to make sure that when I get to I'll get to a certain stage, and I'm going to want to keep the rim, the outside rim, thicker than the inside. So if you've got quite a bit of clay, you might even use, I'll just take a bit of that clay off, you might even use this part of your hand here, which is sort of the outside knuckle of your little finger. See how that can go into the centre? And you can start to press down. And then it's like this part through here becomes the tool that is creating this shape through here. We're just getting that pressed down. Now we don't want the plate to get too thin. I think if you're thinking about at least a centimetre thickness, and then you take it off the wheel with the wire, so then you might lose, say, 2 mils, so then it's like 8 mils. And then you might want to turn off just a couple of mils to give a foot, so that might take it down to 5 or 6 mils. So if you go too thin, you won't be able to turn a foot on it, and also you might get a little bit of cracking. So I reckon leave it a little bit thicker, and then you can turn it rather than make it too thin. So we can keep pushing this down. You might get to a stage where it might be helpful to use a sponge. If it's getting too dry, you can come back with a sponge, 2 hands, keeping yourself anchored, and just start pulling out to the outside. And then we'll just steady up that rim. And then, all right, so I think at this stage what I might do is check the thickness. When you're doing plates, it really gets away from you pretty quickly. So let's have a look here. All right, so we're pretty close to a centimetre. We have a little bit we can play with. I'll just get rid of that hole. I'll just push that clay forward into that middle section. I'll use this sponge again. So I'm just pulling out, and I've left a little bit of a rim on the outside of this plate. Now we've got to make sure that we compress the base. Like we do with all of our things that we throw, we want to come back to the centre so that this weak spot in here doesn't pull apart and get an S-crack when we dry the plate. So starting from the outside, I've got the sponge and I've got my fingers slightly in front of the sponge, so I've got pressure on the fingers, but the sponge is providing a little bit of moisture so that while I'm doing this, it's not just drying up on me, you know, and my fingers aren't getting stuck on it. So I'm going to compress the base. I think it's always good to do it about 3 times, just to make sure that you've done it. So you can compress the base with your fingers, coming in, and then if you wanted to, you could come back with a tool if you were really steady, and you could use this part of the tool, or if you were really steady, this longer part, and you could, if you needed to flatten it a bit more, you hold the tool at an angle towards yourself. If you hold it like this, it can get stuck and flick out and dig a bit of the clay away. So that might be a way to just help you get some flatness in your plate if that's what you want. Now, if you wanted finger marks and you wanted to really see the throwing lines, you could also make that more evident at this stage. So we'll just finish off that base. So like everything that we throw, we don't move on to anything until we've got our base right. And then once we've got our base right, we can start to work on the rim. So there's all different ways we can approach the rim of a plate. You might have a small minimal rim, you might have an old-fashioned plate rim. There's all different sorts of things you can do. So I suppose you want to know what design you're working with before you start making your plate so you can do what you need to do. So I'm going to show you a few different varieties. I'm going to get a bit of water onto that rim to start with, and I'm just going to squeeze. So I've brought that rim up a bit. So you might want a dinner plate that has just a rim coming up. It might be like a platter for something. You might want it to be more upright if you weren't going to stack it. You might want it to, I'll get a bit more water on the outside there. You might want to have it a bit more sort of classic dinner plate like. Or you might want to have a little bit of a, I'll use this, a bit of a, an edge rim coming out this way. So there's all different ways you can approach your rim. Just work it so you get the shape that you like. I'm a bit of a minimalist, so might just leave it pretty simple. All right, I've got this chamois again, so I'm going to come in with the rim. Now there's a little tiny bit of a lump on that. You can, if you want to, you can very carefully use that needle tool, and if you just hold it almost so it just runs across the top, it'll just nick off just, you know, the area where there's a slight bump. And then we'll come back with our chamois again. And again with rims, you know, you can have a flat rim, a wide rim, you can square it off, you can round it off. I'll just round that off. Now we're going to need to do a very small marking, so probably using just the last, say, 3 mils of this wooden tool, of the point. And really for the plate, this is purely just as a wire locator, so that when we cut through this, the wire will have a little place to locate. There we go. And with the plate, we don't put water with the wire. So when you're throwing plates on bats, I'm going to wire this off now with no water, and I'm going to leave it on the bat to dry. But really, the next time I see this, it's going to have re-stuck a little bit to the bat, so I'm going to have to rewire it again. I wouldn't recommend that you leave it too long before you do the second wiring. You either have to wrap it really well so it's wet enough that you can still do that second wiring, or come back the next day and give it that second wiring the next day. Because otherwise, if it dries on the bat, you might get some cracking through this base, because it's going to start shrinking and get stuck on areas of the base and pull apart. So I'll just get my wire. The other thing with wiring these plates off is that you really I really wouldn't recommend you go backwards wiring. I've seen a lot of people cut the backs of their plates. It's much easier working towards yourself. Keep your fingers on the bat. You've got to make sure that that wire is coming along the bottom of that bat the whole way. And then we're just going to take it off the wheel. So we're going to have to get our tool underneath there. And there's our plate on our bat.